Legal correspondent Jack Ford looks at issues, ethics, and the inner workings inside the law next. Stay with us.
You know, sitting quietly in a house of worship like this, looking at these beautiful stained glass windows, it's almost impossible not to be inspired. These windows are part of St. James Episcopal Church on Wilshire Boulevard, and are representative of magnificent windows found in churches and synagogues all over Southern California. The question is, where do these windows come from? It's a craft that's been passed down through the years. A finely detailed process that requires great skill and patience. And here at the Judson Studios in Highland Park, they've been making stained glass windows for 4 generations. William Lees Judson, who was the first dean of USC's College of Fine Arts, started it all back in the late 1800s. And today, his great-grandson is continuing the tradition, operating out of a building that's a cultural historical landmark. This place is kind of old-timey. I don't know how else to put it. It's kind of like going back in time when you go through this place.
Yes, it is.
Do you keep it this way on purpose, or is this just the way it has to be?
Well, we did add electricity. Other than that, it's pretty much the same. We make a pattern. In fact, we make 3 patterns from the full-size drawing. This is one of them, and this is the one that's kept open to keep track of pieces. And to cut the glass, we need patterns. And this, for instance, is a pattern that fits exactly onto here. And we've used shears that cut out a little piece of paper in between this and the next piece to make this pattern the exact size of the piece of glass that we're going to be cutting. And you can see the pattern is actually part of the body of the Christ child here. And we keep it in track by a number here, that's number 47, and then the number down below that, 139-3, is the color number.
I love all of these colors. How many different colors of glass do you have to work from?
Well, in our bins, we probably have more than 1,000 different colors.
1,000 colors, and they go everywhere from, what would this be? Look at this.
Well, that's a selenium color. And
selenium.
Selenium is a metal that makes a number of different colors. That's sort of the middle selenium. Every time we get a shipment in from England, especially because the colors vary so much, it's like Christmas time. We have these boxes and we open them up and
everybody's going around.
Look at that one. Sheet after sheet, because the English glass varies considerably.
You use a lot of English glass?
Yes, most of the glass that we use is from Sunderland, and we also use glass from West Virginia and France and Germany and even Seattle, Washington. Now here's something interesting. This is a panel that was made by an artist back in 1910 to prove to my grandfather that he knew all the techniques of stained glass. His name was Brain, and he was an artist for Tiffany back in New York, and he wanted to come to California. And so he sent this panel to my grandfather.
To show him what kind of work he could do.
Exactly.
I hope your grandfather hired him.
Oh, yes. The man was hired. He worked here from 1910 to about 1925, and You can see he did all the different techniques of painting and enamel work, and even used drapery glass the way Tiffany used it in the wings and the garment of the angel.
Is it hard to train someone to do this sort of work?
Yes, because it's meticulous work, and you have to do something over and over and over again until you get it right. Cutting is not something that's easy to learn. Once you learn it, it's fine, but you have to learn that each kind of glass cuts differently, each color has a different hardness to it. And glazing, the leading, is a difficult thing to learn, especially to make the solder joints look good.
So you have to go through a pretty long apprenticeship program, don't you?
Yeah, the apprenticeship program, the full official one, is about 5 years long.
Now, Ed, does everyone here have a special skill, or can you all interchange with each other, and one day you do this and one day you do something else?
Well, we all have our specialties, but we all can interchange. So one of us can move from the front room, which is designing, all the way to the finish of the product.
You started out as an artist who worked on canvas, and now you're working on glass.
I do both.
Well, do you like this?
Oh, yes, it's a lot of fun. It really is, you know, especially if the freedom, your idea, they give you room to, you know, to express yourself the way you want it, you know. Sometimes you have to, you know, the customer paid for it, so you have to, you know.
Just follow it exactly.
Follow a few things, yes.
But you put your own mark, so to speak.
Oh, yes, definitely. Every artist makes his own mark, yes.
Standing here in what is officially called the design room, because we are surrounded by thousands of designs, but you call it something else.
I call it a think tank.
Because this is where you...
Research and design.
How many windows do you figure you've designed in your career?
I would guess between 1,000 and 2,000, somewhere in there.
2,000 different windows?
Yeah, in 26 years, I would say.
Have you ever made a mistake in the sense that you put something that theologically is not supposed to go there?
There was one where they were pretty sure when Christ was baptized, the water was above his knee, and we had it below the knee. So, and we count fingers and toes. Sometimes we have 6 fingers and 6 toes. So we really check out the windows before we send them out.
Stained glass will go on as long as we can make glass. There's a fascination with it. We know that it's been in existence over 1,000 years. And the idea of being able to put colors together and hold it up to the sunlight and see the light come through it is fascinating. It's almost a religious experience to deal with it. I think there is something almost otherworldly about seeing light coming through the medium you're looking at and changing as it goes through, becoming richer. And it's an awe-inspiring kind of thing in the right place. It can really be beautiful.
Videolog is made possible through a generous grant from the Ralph M. Parsons Foundation.
Prehistoric life, the incredible collection of living things that appeared on Earth long before we did. Some came and went. Others came and stayed. We may call it prehistory, but to the things that lived then, it wasn't pre-anything. It was their story, and it's ours too. We'll tell it on the next Eyewitness, Prehistoric Life.
Be an eyewitness Monday at 8 on KCET.
I love politics. I certainly do.
Politics like you've never seen it before.
Politics is show business for ugly people. I mean, that's why a lot of people get into this thing. It's just all about ego.
Anytime someone tells you how much he or she likes campaigning, I think you are dealing either with a liar or a psychopath.
Watch Vote for Me, Politics in America.
Vote for me and you will see I'm gonna save the whole country.
Trick or treat. I'm Eric Kunzel, and it's holiday time again with the Cincinnati Pops. You want to make sure you're home when we come calling with our Halloween Spooktacular. We'll have some friends with us, Tom Wopak, Robert Guillaume, the Pendragons, and our outrageously dressed orchestra and audience. Dare you invite us into your living room? Dare you not?
See this Halloween Spooktacular Wednesday at 9.
In the 40s, in the 50s, in the 60s. Till the Wreckers Ball hits, just keep dancing, because that's what we do. 3 dances by Paul Taylor, the Wreckers Ball, only on Great Performances.
A Dance in America special, Wednesday at 10.
It set a violent century into motion. The war, we decided, came harshest of all upon us who were young. The first use of chemical weapons.
I felt a choking sensation grip my throat. I seemed to see it. It was the end.
The first time civilians were bombed from the sky.
Nowadays, there's no such animal as a non-combatant.
The century's first genocide.
I have seen too much in these last days. This generation has no future and deserves none.
It colored everything that came before and shadowed everything that followed.
I knew that all was lost. Hatred grew in me. I decided to go into politics.
One way or another, everyone became a soldier in the Great War, coming November 10th.
I'm Susan Stanford, and here's what green means.
As beautiful as Long Island Sound is, and there's a lot of places you can go and you're just amazed at its beauty, it really is very much an urban city. And it's surrounded by 20 million people. 1 in every 10 Americans lives around Long Island Sound. We have a $100 million a year shellfish industry that works here.
Terry Backer is a third-generation fisherman on the Long Island Sound, which stretches 110 miles from New York City to Rhode Island. But these days, you'll rarely find him fishing. Terry Backer has become the full-time watchdog of the waterway. He's now known as the Sound Keeper.
I think part of any keeper's job is to become part of the living memory of the water, so to know where the hot spots are and the discharges are. My job is to methodically track down sources of pollution around Long Island Sound. I mean, it's to find it and to get it stopped.
Backer's small organization is out to keep the Sound healthy. Not so easy amid 16 major ports and 20 million people. At stake, the largest oyster industry in the Northeast and the livelihoods of hundreds of fishermen and their families. They keep Backer informed of nearly everything that happens on the Sound.
I was raised on the water, so, I mean, if someone pees in the water in Mystic, I find out about it in a few days. It's a whole network of fishermen, lobstermen, oystermen that I grew up with. And then as you get the reputation for being the person to call, the person who can cut through the bureaucratic red tape, people start calling you.
And they're calling a lot, reporting more than 500 spills in 1991 alone.
See that foaming down in the bottom there?
Most are small, but some contain thousands of gallons of waste. Backer's first action is careful monitoring.
All right, Tom, you hold her. You may be able to keep her in gear. We sample for fecal coliforms along the river to find out where the contamination is coming from. And we use this fecal coliform bacteria as an indicator to tell us that the possibility of untreated sewage is present.
But monitoring alone won't protect the Sound. Backer has learned the art of pressure politics.
One day I came up in this slip and I noticed that, you see this stuff on the water here? That's oil boom. It's used to prevent oil spills from spreading. The only place that was protected from an accidental spill spreading out was the power plant itself. There was nothing out here to protect the oil from going out and ruining the livelihoods of oystermen. So I said to the guy on the dock, I said, hey, what is this for? Well, in the unlikely event some oil would fall in the water, we wouldn't want it getting sucked into the plant. I said, well, in the unlikely event that oil would spill, we wouldn't want it on our oysters. He said, oh, it probably wouldn't happen. I said, well, then take your boom away from your intake. And what resulted is I went to the state legislature and I raised some issues, and just about 2 years before the Valdez accident, tried to get some laws passed that would require the booming of of these oil tankers at all times, and I couldn't get it through. But when the Valdez bill came, the rest of the politicians almost broke their neck running in to enact the things we had suggested 2 years earlier.
And now the Soundkeeper is wading into politics himself. In 1992, Backer won a seat in the Connecticut legislature, bringing to the State House the lessons of a lifetime on the Sound.
Everything you've ever had, everything you love, everybody you've ever cherished exists because there's a thin layer of atmosphere, clean water, and soil to grow food in. That's it, period, end of story. I'm a fisherman. This is the place I live. I take care of it. That's it.
Terry Backer will tell you that protecting our waters begins at home. In fact, the biggest polluters of inland waterways are actually household chemicals like paint and motor oil dumped down storm drains. So recycle the hazardous waste you create at home and be your own Soundkeeper. That's what green means.
Green Means is made possible by the Richard and Rhoda Goldman Fund, sponsors of the Goldman Environmental Prize, recognizing environmental heroes throughout the world.
Proposition 209, the Civil Rights Initiative, is discussed on Life and Times, Monday at 7:30.
Perhaps the least understood branch of government is the Supreme Court. Although the court's decisions can directly impact all of us, few Americans understand how the court works and its role in our lives. Since essentially everything the court does, other than the published decisions, is accomplished in private, we know little about how those decisions are reached. Today, we'll take a look inside the U.S. Supreme Court.
Lawyers seek to discover new ways to resolve legal issues on Inside the Law. Inside the Law is made possible in part by a grant from Reliance National Insurance Company, providing property, casualty, accident, and health insurance. Reliance National, the choice.
Today's program, a look at the U.S. Supreme Court, the role of the court. Hello, I'm Jack Ford. The inner workings of the Supreme Court are a mystery to most of us. How do the justices decide which cases to hear? How do they reach a decision? How is it decided who will write the majority opinion of the court? Well, today we'll answer these questions and explore other issues which impact the role and operation of the Supreme Court. And joining us today to discuss these issues are Tim O'Brien, law correspondent for ABC News, who has covered the Supreme Court for years. Professor A.E. Dick Howard of the University of Virginia School of Law. By satellite from Washington, Nina Totenberg, legal affairs correspondent for National Public Radio. Attorney and former clerk for Chief Justice William Rehnquist, Charles Cooper. And also by satellite from Washington, President of the American Civil Liberties Union, Nadine Strassen. Professor Howard, explain to us how it is that a case makes its way all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Well, in this country, we have both state and federal courts, and thousands of cases, of course, each year percolate up through those court systems. Litigants may choose to ask for review in the U.S. Supreme Court either from a federal court of appeals in the federal system or from a state Supreme Court in the state system. Obviously, the decision to ask for review is that of the parties. They think their case is so important, they don't like the decision they've gotten below, they ask the Supreme Court to review it. The Supreme Court, in turn, has its discretion to decide which of those cases it will hear. 4,000 or 5,000 cases may be put on the court's doorstep each year, but they're only going to hear a handful of those cases.
So then, Mr. Cooper, we're all familiar with seeing somebody walk out of a courthouse, the person's just been convicted of some sort of crime, and they say to the microphones, "I'm not finished fighting yet. I'm taking this case all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court." Not that easy?
No, it's not that easy. As Professor Howard has said, about 5,000 or 6,000 petitions of that kind go to the Supreme Court, and last year I think they disposed of fewer than 80 cases on the merits. So as you can see, it's a very small percentage. But you only need to get 4 votes on the Supreme Court out of the 9 to have your case granted for review. Of course, you have to have 5 votes to win your case, but it only takes 4 votes to get there, but still a very, very small percentage of cases ever make it to the United States Supreme Court.
You're familiar with the internal workings of the court, having served as a clerk there. Are there cases or are there situations where justices will say, boy, I see this case getting started out there in Minnesota, and this looks like something that we should get our hands on sometime down the road.
That's actually pretty rare. If people like Tim O'Brien bring it to everybody's attention, and it's a very, celebrated kind of legal issue, they'll come to know about its existence the same as you and I will. But by and large, they know of the cases when they come either to their attention through media exposure, or they come to their attention through the petitions for certiorari.
Tim O'Brien, how about that? How about the impact or the role of the media here on cases when they're just getting started? Members of the media sort of pick out a case and say, you know, this is one that we should latch on to because it looks like this one is going to work its way up there?
Well, many of the cases that we latch on to, such as the O.J. Simpson case, don't raise the kinds of issues that the Supreme Court is likely to address. They do have some hard rules, and they have some rather flexible rules. Any case they're going to review must raise a substantial federal question involving the U.S. Constitution, a U.S. treaty, or a federal law. So if it's merely a state issue, the justices won't grant review. They look for conflicts in the circuits. Sometimes those are boring technical cases, but if the federal courts in California rule one way on an issue and the federal courts on the East Coast rule the opposite way on the identical issue, they'll try to reconcile the conflict. And then, of course, they do look for important constitutional questions. And sometimes we do latch onto those. We've seen that with doctor-assisted suicide and the right to die. I wouldn't be surprised if in the next few weeks we learn the Supreme Court also might want to look at those issues.
Nina Totenberg, do you get a sense ever that the people on the court have any idea or any sense what the media is emphasizing out there and whether it has any impact at all on the decisions?
Well, they obviously know. They read the newspapers and they watch television and they listen to National Public Radio. But
I think it's probably in the other order, don't you think? They listen to National Public Radio, and then when they have time, they do some of the others?
That's it.
After NBC, and Tim is putting ABC into the mix here.
But, it's really amazing to me the number of times that we in the press think that a case is going to get what they call granted because it's so big and it's so important, and the most recent one of this kind was a big affirmative action case in college admissions that came out of the University of Texas. This is a case that has repercussions for all the schools in this country, and not to mention perhaps other spheres like employment. And everybody thought that the Supreme Court would grant that case, and they did not. And nobody really knows why.
Is there a way that lawyers or litigants can make their case more attractive or potentially more attractive to the justices, or do they just have to sit back and see whether the justices are interested or not?
Well, your main goal is to persuade them that your case and the resolution of your issue has implications for people beyond the parties that are in the case. And I think, as Tim O'Brien has suggested, if you can find another case out there that is in conflict with yours, the chances of your getting the Supreme Court to review it are enormously higher. The final thing is if the Solicitor General, that is the Department of Justice's principal officer before the court, agrees that your case should be granted, the chances are much greater that you'll get it heard.
Professor Howard, let's assume, as we take our walk through this process here, that the court has decided that they will hear a particular case. What happens next?
Well, what they do at this point is that the parties have filed preliminary briefs asking the court to hear or not hear the case. Once the court says, yes, we're going to hear this one, then the parties file more complete briefs on the merits of the case. They may argue federal statutes, constitutional questions, whatever else is in the case. Those briefs are then circulated to all the chambers, and the justices and their law clerks begin preparation for oral argument. Oral argument set, typically each side has 30 minutes, one side and the other, to argue the case before the justices, after which they then go into conference and take kind of a straw vote, if you like. They say, they talk about the case around the conference table, and they take a sort of poll of the justices. Do you vote to affirm or to reverse? And then they assign opinions and begin the process of deciding what they will say about the case when the opinions come down. It's a very lengthy process, in fact, from the filing of the first briefs to the handing down of the opinion, during which there's a great deal of work and negotiation and thinking and indeed adjustment of position sometimes.
And surprisingly, the debate occurs more during oral argument than it does around the conference table. The justices, by and large, state their positions. There's very little debate. Some of the justices don't like that. And they take that tentative vote, and I'm told that tentative vote rarely changes, maybe once a year.
That sound correct to you?
No, that is right. Yes,
why is it that, as Mr. O'Brien says, surprisingly, you don't get a lot of debate around the conference table?
Because they like to do it in writing.
Why?
Because it's on paper. You can deal with it. It's not a forensic argument. The question is really the debate on paper. And I actually think that the results do change from time to time, from what I'm told. And in fact, there are cases, very interesting cases, of members of the court assigned to write an opinion for the majority, sitting down to write it, and after months of trying to write it, deciding that they were wrong. That it can't, the argument simply cannot be sustained the way they thought it could be sustained, and changing their mind.
That's true. That's extremely rare, and it does happen once or twice a term that a vote will come out differently from the way it tentatively came out at conference. But that too is rare.
I think people will probably be somewhat fascinated over the notion that once the justices get in there around their conference table, that you're not seeing this marvelous high-level Socratic dialogue and discourse or just flat-out debate with each other in order to resolve this.
Well, you have to think about this in terms of yourself. Let's assume that you are a very accomplished lawyer. And you then go to sit on the Supreme Court. You've been sitting there for several years. You've been ruling on cases that involve this issue at least tangentially. You've had the briefs in this case, maybe even over the summer. You've assigned your law clerks to prepare long memoranda, and you've read old case law on this. You've done a lot of thinking about it before you get to the oral argument. And if you have questions, you press them at the oral argument. It would be most unlikely that you wouldn't have resolved these issues in your own mind.
But you don't see then, Mr. Cooper, after the oral argument, everybody come back in around that conference table and the justices start saying to each other, okay, now I got a better handle on this, and now let me tell you why I think your position is wrong, why you should change it.
You do see that. I mean, there is a conference right after the oral argument, within a couple of days right after the oral argument. But it is not, or at least I'm told, and nobody is in that conference but the justices themselves.
Important. You as a law clerk are not there.
Nobody.
Just the justices.
Nobody is there. No secretaries, no messengers, no law clerks, no relatives. There are 9 people at most in that conference. And, but what those of us who follow this understand is that there's not a whole lot of debate and dialogue in that conference. They do express their views. They do take a vote, a preliminary vote, and they can state their positions and their rationale for it.
I want to come back in 1 second, because I want to ask about the role of law clerks here. But Nadine Strassen, let me bring you into this. What do you think about the secrecy that envelops all of this? The fact that when these major issues are being discussed, only the 9 justices are participating, nobody has any clue what they're talking about.
Well, I actually agree with Nina Totenberg that the important part of the process is largely open to public scrutiny and indeed even public participation, because one part of the process that Dick Howard did not mention, which I think is very important and increasingly important, is the submission of amicus, or friend of the court briefs, where we have organizations from across the ideological spectrum filing briefs. Usually it's very easy to get the consent of the court and the parties, in which they express and explain the larger social and political and legal implications upon broad causes and controversies of the particular case before the court. And a number of justices have said that they tend to read these briefs and take them very seriously in making their decisions. Now, I do think from everything I've read, and the sources are journals of the justices who describe what goes on in the conference, I do think that not many minds are changed there. Not too much of public importance is happening. The one aspect of the process that I wish would be more open to the public is the oral argument before the United States Supreme Court. The court feels very adamantly that cameras should not be allowed in the courtroom. Last spring, Justice Souter testified before Congress, and he said, you know, cameras will come into this courtroom over my dead body. I think that's a real shame, because it is a very exciting process. I encourage all of my law students to go there, in which there they can see the justices arguing with each other through the form of asking questions to the litigants.
Professor Howard, we're seeing now, especially on the heels of the O.J. Simpson murder trial, what seems to be a reactionary backlash against cameras in the courtroom at a variety of levels. Do you anticipate that at any time in the near future the U.S. Supreme Court will open its arms to cameras?
Well, to be candid, I think none of us will live long enough to see cameras in the U.S. Supreme Court room itself because of views like that of Justice Souter. I personally don't see the harm that would be done. I understand in the trial of a case, O.J. Simpson being a good example, why there's a danger that lawyers will grandstand, play to the camera, even the judge in that case may have done some of that. I don't think there's that danger in the U.S. Supreme Court. You could simply have a very discreet camera. It could be trained only on the attorneys arguing the case, not panning the courtroom for reactions and that kind of thing. I think there's so much at stake for the lawyers arguing to the court and for the court itself. I don't think they would they probably would tend not to even think about the cameras being there. I agree with Nadine Strossen. A lot of good would be done if the public could see these arguments.
Mr. Cooper, what do you think about cameras in there?
I think probably the people who make arguments before the court would actually prefer to have them there. But I tend to agree with the justices. I think that there is a concern that the nature of the arguments might well change. The demeanor of the people who are on camera, whether it be at the lectern or behind the bench, might well change.
But isn't the argument back to that twofold? First, that the justices have every ability to control people in front of them, and if they feel somebody has gone beyond which is professionally acceptable, they say, you know what, have a seat. We don't need anything more from you. But isn't there a broader philosophical argument where people will say, all right, if I can turn on my television and watch the sentencing of somebody in a municipal court proceeding, which I can now in many jurisdictions, many venues, why can't I also turn on my television and watch the great issues of our time be debated within the majesty of a Supreme Court courtroom? Why would that have an impact?
I'll tell you what I think the members of the court would say if you really could get them in their heart of hearts to talk to you about it. And that is that a great deal of the authority of the court is involved in a certain kind of mystique. And they don't want to be like the Congress of the United States or the President of the United States, sort of accessible and available to everybody. They do want to be different and special.
And yet everybody I know who sees the court in person comes away with a real inspiration and increased respect for the system of justice in general and for the Supreme Court in particular. It's a majestic
Nadine, that's a large
setting.
part of it. Not only is it an exciting place, but it works remarkably well, and many Americans don't know that. They should have the opportunity to see it. I feel very passionately about this, having been there for many years. The arguments against cameras in the court do not apply with full force at the Supreme Court. You don't have jurors or witnesses who might be intimidated. And the arguments in favor of cameras in the Supreme Court apply with special force given the magnitude of the issues that are argued up there.
Tim, you've spent 20 years covering the U.S. Supreme Court. Do you share Professor Howard's view that in our lifetime it's not going to happen?
No.
Why are you a little bit more...
He's younger than him.
No, but I think, for one, I think there could be some breaks in the wall there. Only one justice has come out publicly in favor of it, Justice Stevens, but that doesn't mean others aren't in favor.
Is it perhaps a generational thing?
I think that plays into it.
Justice Souter's a lot younger than Justice Stevens.
And Justice Souter never had a television set before he joined the Supreme Court.
Let's take a look at some of the other issues we've mentioned. Mr. Cooper, you were a clerk on the U.S. Supreme Court, and there's always a question in the minds of people as to just how much power is wielded by clerks. Tell us what you do.
Well, it varies from one chambers to another. One law clerk reports to one justice. They're not a pool of clerks or anything like that. But in the Rehnquist chambers, I clerked for Chief Justice Rehnquist, the clerks are basically his little law firm, providing him with legal research, precedent, and cases that bear on a particular issue, helping with the drafting of decisions, and just otherwise counseling with the justice.
Let's talk a little bit about how the court has evolved over the years. Professor, we hear people, and oftentimes they say this in a manner in which they're decrying where the court has gone. We hear people talk about judicial activism, and then we hear other people talk about strict constructionists. Give us your sense over the last 50 years or so how the Supreme Court has evolved.
Well, it's interesting that one man's activism is another man's restraint. I often think that the definition of judicial activism is simply that the court has handed down a decision that you don't like. The criticism of the court back in the 1930s, before 1937, was from liberals who thought that a conservative court was standing in the path of social and economic reform, striking down provisions of Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal. 30 years later, in the 1960s, the criticisms were from conservatives of the Warren Court's activism in areas like criminal justice and one person, one vote and the Bill of Rights. I think that the reason the issues become more before us in modern times is that the court has reached into more and more areas than it used to do. And therefore, we've gotten used to a kind of judicial intervention in the social and political scene. But the court has always been very much involved in issues that some people would characterize as political. The Marshall Court certainly upset Thomas Jefferson as president by lecturing him as far back as Marbury versus Madison in 1803. So I'm not sure this is a new phenomenon by any means, but I think it's simply more pervasive because law generally and constitutional law specifically reach into so many more areas than it used to do.
Nina Totenberg, we have seen statistics telling us that this court in its most recent term took significantly less cases to consider than other courts. Do you get a sense through that number that what we're seeing is the court pulling back a little bit and perhaps not being as inclined to jump into these social issues?
No. It's one of the most fascinating and irresolvable phenomena. The court this past year, accepted for review literally about half the number of cases that it had 10 or 15 years ago. And the justices themselves do not really have any real understanding of why that is. Yes, they could have taken this case or that case, and they didn't. But it really is a phenomenon that nobody really has been able to explain adequately. Now, there is one thing that's happened at the same time, and that is, this is perhaps more detailed than some people want to know, but there's something called the clerk pool at the Supreme Court. It used to be that every justice had his or her law clerks go through all the petitions, and the justice did himself very often, and decide which ones they wanted to vote to hear. Now there is a pool that serves, I think, all but one member of the court. And it's just a rotating pool of, I think, 3 or 4 clerks, and they make recommendations to other members, to the full court. And the full court, of course, sometimes doesn't agree with those recommendations, but I have a feeling that that homogenization of the internal review process may have something to do with this, but I'm not quite sure what.
And that gets back to the comments that Chuck Cooper made about the role of the law clerks, because there has been a fair amount of criticism, most scathingly and most recently in a book by Bernie Schwartz, an emeritus professor at NYU Law School, in which he condemns what he calls an over-reliance on clerks. He calls them disparagingly the junior Supreme Court, and suggests that this does account for a decline in the number and, he says, the quality of Supreme Court decisions as well.
I think that's poppycock. I really do. I mean, to see...
Not surprisingly, Chuck Cooper is nodding yes along with you here, Nina.
I mean, to see these often very arrogant 25-year-olds.
I assume Chuck disagrees with that.
He didn't nod to that part.
Serving their justices and often just getting reamed against the wall. And it's the justices' ideas that the clerk is ordered to carry out.
Let's wrap this up, if we might, with a view from each of you as to what the U.S. Supreme Court is going to certainly look like, what it will look like, and the role it will be playing, let's say, 10 years or so down the road. Tim O'Brien, you first.
I think it's going to look very much like it looks today. 9 justices deciding controversial cases. The supply of explosive, socially contentious issues seems inexhaustible. It's going to look very much like it does right now.
Mr. Cooper?
I can't improve on that. I think Tim is absolutely right. The Supreme Court, for better or for worse, has in a very real sense become another political institution in our federal governmental system, deciding social issues without, in my opinion, a proper regard for what the appropriate role for the Congress and the state legislatures is.
Nina Totenberg, do you think it'll look the same, or do you think perhaps the composition of the court will more accurately reflect the nation?
I think it'll be more female, that's for sure. You know, the bar is much more female, and the court will become more female. I think it largely will be a middle-of-the-road court, probably pretty conservative as it is now on criminal law issues and maybe business law issues, and a little more liberal on what we might call social issues like abortion, maybe even right to die, questions like that. The racial questions, such as affirmative action, I'm really unclear where the court is going on, and that may have a good deal to do with who names the next set of justices.
And Nadine Strassen, your thoughts?
Well, contrary to Chuck Cooper, I think that the court is acting appropriately according to its constitutional role as the ultimate guarantor of individual rights and minority group rights. And ironically, it is the elected branches of government who more and more are abdicating their responsibility to uphold the Constitution and dumping the most contentious, controversial, difficult issues on the United States Supreme Court so that they can avoid political controversy. That happened, for example, with the recently passed Communications Decency Act, where many members of Congress said, we know it's unconstitutional, we don't want to take the heat for voting against it, so we're creating a special provision of expedited review by the Supreme Court.
I think we're entering an uncommonly interesting period in the U.S. Supreme Court's history. There are no justices left on the court who served in the Warren Court. There are no justices on the present court appointed by Democrats other than the two put there by President Clinton. And what I see in the court that's now emerging is a more conservative court clearly than it was a few years back, and a court that clearly has an appetite to reopen and revisit questions long thought settled. For example, federalism, which most people thought was a joke a few years back, suddenly is on the court's agenda. The court is looking back to questions of property rights, which the Warren Court never seemed to care much about. The term limits case saw the court debating issues that reminded me of debates back in the 1830s, not the 1930s. I think this is a court that's willing to sort of open a lot of doors. It's going to be a very interesting place to watch.
One point that might usefully be made here, Jack, though, is with respect to Dick's point that this is a more conservative court than it was, is that in all of the controversial decisions handed down the last couple of years, they have been 5-4. That is, the ones with a conservative result. They've been 5-4 decisions. The president's role in appointing Supreme Court justices.
And we'll have to leave our discussion today with those thoughts. The inner sanctity of the Supreme Court has been closely guarded for almost 200 years. However, the more we understand about how the Supreme Court arrives at decisions, the better we can evaluate the results and the performance of the judges. I'd like to thank my guests and also thank you for joining us Inside the Law.
Inside the Law is made possible in part by a grant from Reliance National Insurance Company, providing property, casualty, accident, and health insurance. Reliance National, the choice. And is produced in association with the American Bar Association.
An alarming number of violent crimes have recently been alleged to have been induced by popular movies. Should the artistic creators of violent films bear any responsibility for copycat crimes? Join us as Inside the Law explores media responsibility.
Inside the Law is made possible in part by a grant from Reliance National Insurance Company, providing property, casualty, accident, and health insurance. Reliance National, the choice.
KCET gratefully acknowledges a generous bequest from the Doris Nadine Richardson and Lori Gould Trust. Their gift will help sustain KCET's mission to educate, enrich, and serve the communities of Southern and Central California.
It happens every day. It doesn't stop when you reach a certain age. We're all of us learning, even now. You see something in a person's face and see all they struggle to learn. It could be we are here solely to remind each other what must not be missed or ignored, but celebrated. When do we stop learning? Maybe never.
In Chinese medicine, that the body has to move.
This is KCET Los Angeles, subscriber-supported television for Southern and Central California, ending another broadcast day. Our programming reflects a rich variety of local interests and features outstanding cultural, educational, and public affairs programs from PBS, the Public Broadcasting Service, independent producers, and educational institutions. Our continued success depends on viewer support. If you would like to become a KCET subscriber and receive our monthly program guide, send a check for $40 or more to KCET, P.O. Box 3728, Escondido, California 92025. Tune in tomorrow for another day filled with outstanding programs on KCET Los Angeles.